So back in 2016, you and I both participated in a show for ID, a three-part series on the murder of JonBenet Ramsey called American Murder Mysteries, JonBenet Ramsey. I produced the show, as you know, and I also had the exclusive interview with John Mark Karr. The interesting thing is you were one of the only people at the time who wasn't directly involved with the case. We had detectives and journalists like myself and um, family members and friends who were directly involved in the case. Now, you came in. The reason I needed you for this special is because of your expertise as an interrogation expert, and you examined the interrogation tapes of John and Patsy, but you also looked at, I don't want to call them interrogation tapes of Burke. They were, what were they, Michele? They were tapes. They were his with his therapist. What were they again?
It was actually done. It's a victim sensitive interview that they conducted. Members of law enforcement conducted this interview with him. But it was just an interview done afterwards, and they're trying to figure out what happened before the murder, what happened perhaps during the murder, and what happened after the murder. And those are the videos that I saw, but that's what everyone refers to as the interrogation tapes.
Right. And the interesting, most important thing is I want people to understand is you looked at every second of these tapes. And the reason why it was so important to have you on the show is because we couldn't air the tapes of Burke because he was underage and there was legal issues and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, we actually got a cease and desist from another television
all
show
right,
who's
we
airing
did.
something similar. Yeah.
But I think, Michele, well, I'm going to jump ahead and we're going to go back. The most important thing about your role in this and what happened was what happened after the show and who reached out to you. But first of all, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, we're talking about JonBenet Ramsey, and there's been a new special out, and everyone's saying that there's new evidence. But I think you and I've always been on the same page as to who did kill JonBenet Ramsey, and that's the name of our show today, right? What do you want to call it? Who didn't kill JonBenet Ramsey?
Yeah, every episode out there on John Benet Ramsey's murder is called "Who Killed John Benet." I'm like, this episode is called "Who Didn't Kill John Benet," because we might not be able to tell you exactly what happened there and who killed John Benet, but I can probably tell you who didn't kill John Benet.
Right. And I think the most important thing, Michele, if you could take us through like the evidence in this case. I think that people need to be reminded of the facts. For example, the handwriting of the note was in Patsy's handwriting. Okay, but let's step back for a little bit. This was phoned in as a kidnapping, okay, an abduction, right? A kidnapping. So as a member of law enforcement, you would assume that the individual would be removed from the home,
Right,
correct?
it's a crime scene, and obviously we don't want to take everyone through stuff that's been gone through over and over and over again. Everybody knows the facts. They can Google it. They can look at the other 675 shows that have been done on it. But the crime scene was botched. The crime scene should have been secured. The second that the law enforcement arrived on scene, it should have been secured. Everyone should have been taken out of there. They weren't. It was detectives that probably never handled a homicide before, so they might not have known exactly what they should have done and what protocol was.
But Michele, let's back up a little bit. I want to just say to you, it wasn't so much that people should have been removed from that crime scene. I don't think people should have ever been invited to that crime scene. That's the bigger issue.
You don't think people should have come over and had bagels in the crime scene? That's not normal.
Right. So, obviously, people that are watching this are going to make the assumption that you and I are leaning towards what theory. I believe, and I'll be really upfront with you that nobody broke into that house, that this a murder was orchestrated by somebody who was inside that home,
Yeah,
not
I mean,
somebody that
yeah.
broke into the house. Does that make sense? Not there was no intruder. I don't
So
buy.
you don't believe the intruder theory. Um, you and I worked on this case in the sense of we were able to go through all of the interview tapes. We were able to look at all the crime scene videos and not the stuff that's been, disseminated on television. We actually did speak to some of the law enforcement, some of the first responders, and we did see everything, authenticated stuff, not stuff that's been um, copied over a million times. But we saw a lot of stuff, some of the stuff that we weren't supposed to see. And I don't think this case was that complicated. I know the dad, John, is always on television saying this case should have been solved. It should have been solved. Um, I think some things are very simplistic, and if you look at the simple things in this case, like the ransom note, I do believe that Patsy Ramsey clearly wrote the ransom note. And if she wrote the note, then you have to think, why did she write the note?
Why do you say you think she wrote the note?
I believe she wrote the note. There was a lot of handwriting experts who looked at the notes and noticed the similarities in the writing. And I'm no handwriting expert, and I don't claim to be, but I can even notice the similarities. And I always tell people, they're like, "Who wrote the ransom note?" I'm like, "The person who wrote the ransom note is the same person who named their kid JonBenet, because they use the word attaché. The person who uses the word attaché is the same person who named their kid JonBenet." So that's kind of a joke, but it's not a joke. There's certain vernacular that she used in there, or that, the person whoever wrote it used. Um, Men don't write letters that are 3 pages long, so that also leads to her. And there's just a lot of things in there. And also, to preface my comments here, I've been doing this for almost 24 years, and I've worked on hundreds, probably thousands, but I'll say hundreds of murders. And I I can spot things right away, and I can say with much certainty that I believe that she wrote this note. Um, do I think that she killed JonBenet? Not necessarily. I think an accident occurred inside the home, and I think everything after that was a cover up. Who did the accident occur with? That's a whole other set of theories that we can get into.
Michele, for anybody who's just tuning in, I want people to understand that Michelle's not just a talking head. She's not some armchair detective. She's a seasoned detective with the Chicago Police Department. She's got 24 years of experience. She's an interrogation expert. She's actually now a sergeant with the Chicago Police Department. I met her years ago, and we bonded over our lust or our love for investigation. I think, Michele, if you could talk a little bit about, there's other things in that note. Like, you've talked to me in details about the amount of ransom notes. I think the biggest thing is what you pointed out to me is Patsy Ramsey was wearing the same clothes as the night before. Okay. I told you about Burke's beds not being made. I can talk to you about later on about why that was and how I know that. But talk to me about the amount of the ransom note and why that's just literally ludicrous to you, the number, the actual number.
$118,000 was the amount of John's bonus. She picked, or someone picked, a number that would be relevant to their situation. And people are just so suspicious when they do things. And writing out that letter, um, whoever wrote it practiced ahead of time, and everyone knows this who's followed the case at all. Um, and it was well thought out. So something like picking something that related to the Ramseys, in particular John, to make it look like they were being targeted, like, oh my God, it must be someone related to John at work, and that's why we were targeted. They were wealthy people, so it might make sense that someone that was related to his business might be targeting him. But even at that time, $118,000 wasn't really a lot of money. So it was just kind of an odd thing. And it is definitely something where if you were trying to lead the law enforcement officers in a certain direction, you might definitely go towards his job and think, okay, was he the target? Did this happen because of something that he did with a business associate or whatever? So yeah, that was suspicious. But again, going back just to even the contents of the ransom note, it's nonsense. Everything in there was nonsense. And the fact that that note was probably written after she was already dead. So again, this is all done after she's deceased to make it look like a kidnapping. Why? Why would someone do this? For what?
So Michelle, before we get into what happened to you, to us after the show aired, take me through step by step, as quick as you can, um, the investigation and sort of the uh, like kind of from your lens and kind of what was wrong with this story and why you believe or why you believe this leads to a certain individual and who do you believe that individual is.
Well, okay. Again, I don't want to hash through every bit of the investigation that most people know. Anyone who's watching that has probably seen a lot of the television shows. The things that stand out to me. Patsy Ramsey had a full face of makeup on when the police arrived on scene. Pageant queens don't go to sleep with makeup on. So I find it hard to believe that she went to sleep with a full face of makeup on. I also find it hard to believe that she had time to put makeup on before the police arrived. She had the same outfit that she had on the night before. I doubt that she would have the same put the same outfit on that she had on the night before. So it looks to me like she's been up all night. If that's the case, why was she up all night? We have to wonder what went on that she was up all night. What was she doing all night? So those are the problems. Another problem that stands out to me is fibers from her sweater were in the garrote that was tied around JonBenet Ramsey's neck. That's also very problematic. The garrote that was used around JonBenet Ramsey's neck was made from a paintbrush that was in Patsy Ramsey's uh, art case or craft kit or whatever it was, and it was cracked in half, and the other piece of it was put back in the craft kit. I have a whole theory that I won't even get into about the underwear and the clothing and everything else, but I do believe that the only person that would have dressed her like that is Patsy Ramsey. And I think she would have done that in the basement as to not have to go upstairs and alert anyone. And this brings me to my second point is I know a lot of people are going to jump down my throats about this, but I believe John Ramsey. I've had many, many cases in my career where the mom has been responsible for the death of a child and the father of the child does not, cannot believe that the mother is responsible. And either they block everything out and choose to believe it, or they're just not able to believe that a woman, that a mom could do something like this. So they believe it. And when I see him on television doing these interviews, I believe him. And I don't want to believe him. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way this guy had nothing to do with this. But I will say, my gut believes that he had nothing to do with this.
So, Michelle, those were great specifics. I want to jump off of what you said, but give me generalizations of this crime scene. For example, we've talked about this a million times. Uh, Normally, a abduction, kidnapping, the particular individual isn't left at the scene. Give it, and everybody listening, and so people can really kind of start to understand that why that this is off, right? So give me some generalizations. There was a ransom note. The individual was said to be kidnapped, yet the individual was found in the home. That's really unusual. Then look at like the statistics of Boulder, Colorado. There had never been an incident like this. It's Christmas Eve. I mean, just kind of go through, as a detective, a seasoned detective, a seasoned sergeant like yourself, what are things that are just instantly like, wait, there's something wrong?
Well, I mean, when people do kidnappings, and especially when they leave notes where they want something, and then they give you a time where they're going to call. Usually, that time is a big deal, and everyone should be waiting around like, oh my God, did the kidnapper call? From what I've learned from the investigation, the time came and went, and no one said anything about it. So it's like everyone knew that the kidnappers were never going to call. So from the beginning, it seemed like, did everyone know there was no kidnapping? Or if someone kidnapped my daughter, and I have a little girl, there's no way I would be sitting in the living room having bagels with my friends. And aside from that, wouldn't you be sitting by the phone waiting? Oh my God, this guy said he's going to call. And whether you believe it or not, you're going to want and pray and hope that this kidnapper calls. So everything was off about it being a kidnapping. The note is left on the stairs, so this person is inside the house. Um, Even now, and I always say this, the only theory that I could have about them there being an intruder is if someone unbeknownst to them was living inside the house in the basement and they had no idea. That didn't happen, but that's the only way this could happen. You've heard weird stories about squatters living in people's houses. This didn't
Right.
happen here, but that's the only possible way this can happen. And this person, this did happen, and I'm going off on a total other tangent. I know that they would have left something behind. But in a typical kidnapping ransom situation, um, also typically the FBI would have been called
Yeah.
in a
Michelle, let me
sure.
ask you this. Was there any indication that there was ever any kind of phone calls to the house? Like there was this alleged ransom note they were going to call. Was there any indication that these individuals who allegedly abducted her and left her in the house knew the phone number of the house? This was before there were cell phones. Or was there any calls? Was there any hangups? Do we have any information that there was any calls? Because normally, correct me if I'm wrong, in a hostage situation, there would be some sort of interaction. Like if you were the Ramses and I was the individual calling, being like, I have your daughter, the clock is ticking. Correct? Am I wrong on that, or am I right? Just tell me.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, if they truly believe that this was a kidnapping, there should be a phone call. There should be some kind of communication to let them know how to do this, exchange, or how to give this person the $118,000 that they want. But it seemed like from the beginning, everyone, including law enforcement, knew this. There was not going to be any exchange. And the fact that the detective at some point let John Ramsey walk through the house. And, everyone says that she told John Ramsey, look around, basically like look for your daughter. That's not what happened, what she did. And I kind of understand what she did. She shouldn't have done this. But what she was saying is look for things out of place. This is your house. If the sugar is moved over, if, an item should have been by the door and it's moved over. That's what he was looking for, but you would never, ever, ever do that without a law enforcement person next to you documenting exactly what you're doing.
Right,
This
but
is
by this point, Michelle, she'd already had several friends in the house moving and cleaning things.
yes.
So to say to you, let Michelle say you'd be like, oh, my sugar thing is moved. Well, Cindy, Mary, and Susie were in here cleaning,
Yeah,
so they could have been responsible for that.
absolutely.
So before we get into what happened to you or the call you received and how it put you down a different path in the investigation after the show aired, by the way, you did a great job. You really clinically took us through step by step, kind of what happened. And I think everybody listening to this, please take a look at the JonBenet Ramsey special, JonBenet Ramsey. It's American Murder Mysteries on ID. I believe it's on Max now. It's not the one on on Netflix. We were long before that, but I want to let everybody know during that show I got the interview with John Mark Karr. All right, it was the 20th anniversary of the 20th anniversary of the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Every network was doing the story, and everybody wanted the interview with John Mark Karr. Michelle, maybe you can set this up by explaining to everybody who John Mark Karr is. I think everybody knows, but give us a quick, who is John Mark Karr?
Well, he was essentially the only person that was ever arrested for this crime, right? This is the guy that said that he did it. And it's bizarre because Steph, you and I never actually talked about how you ended up. You actually went to Thailand and secured an interview with this guy. And I think this guy tortured you mentally for years and years after that, because I mean, that was a wild interview, like one that stays with you to this day, right? Like, just tell me, give me a brief. I don't want to run too long into this.
Yeah.
I don't even know the story. So give us a brief on that.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm still traumatized by the whole experience.
Yeah.
And get everybody that wants to watch it. It's a JonBenet Ramsey special on ID Max. It's a 3 hour special of the John Mark Karr. My interview with him is in the third hour. So what happened, Michelle, is as a investigative journalist and TV producer, I'm putting this story together, and I need to bring in the people who were part of the story, the good, the bad, the ugly. That's my job, right? I'm going to tell this story. I need to get us there. So one of the key people for me, as you said, he was the only person ever arrested for the murder was John Mark Karr. I managed to make contact with him. And at the time, he was living in, I believe it was New Zealand. And I had hours and hours and hours of conversations with him about interviewing him. He wanted to come to the United States. Okay. And in my mind, Michele, I'm like, I'm not bringing this guy here. And because I don't want him to commit any crimes on my watch. Could you imagine if I brought
Yeah.
him here and something happened? So I was communicating with him and finagling him. And we ended up by agreeing to fly him from New Zealand to Thailand. Coincidentally or ironically, Thailand was where he was arrested. You can remember the scene of him being arrested. He was familiar with Thailand. And as you know, I'd been to Thailand before for uh, interviewing. Well, no, that was, wait, was that after or before? I interviewed
You're in Vandersloot?
no, brain dead, right? It's Friday night, everybody. You're on Vandersloot. That was after.
It was after. It was definitely after.
Thailand was a
Yeah.
significant place for him because he felt comfortable and the network agreed. So we flew him to Thailand, and there's, I'll spare you all the details. I get there and I'm late. And he's sitting in my hotel lobby. Michele, I'm like, the fuck is he doing here? Right in my love. And it was probably the most bizarre interview. Um, Perhaps I think in retrospect, I wasn't really prepared for the mental warfare that he was kind of putting on me. Like, let me give you an example. So, he was, just he was bombarding me with calls, bombarding. He's one of these people that like exhausts you. Okay. You've dealt with this, you've interrogated 1,000 people, you know what I'm talking about. You're
Yeah.
better at this than I am. He shows up at the interview. I have this incredible crew, and I'd love to one day sit down and talk to them. I still keep in touch with them. They were local guys. And he comes in, and Michelle's like, I'm not doing this interview. You need to move the lights. And he had to move the lights and move everything. And I was like, I was looking at, I'm like this. I'm like so frustrated. I'm like, let him just do it. Let him do this. It was a game, right? It was a cat and mouse game, power struggle. And we sat down, and the depth of his insanity, and I think my frustration came out in the interview. And he literally told me to go fuck myself on camera. I mean, we have it. It's in the special. I don't know to this day what his motive is. I believe that he had had some kind of interaction with her at the pageants. I think there's been photos of him. I think he was a pedophile. He's a pedophile. But I don't believe that he was inside that house that night. I think
Do you think he
he's
was ever inside the house?
so that's an interesting question because again, I don't have enough information to say he hasn't, but I've been on tour of the homes. Patsy Ramsey was one of these people that was pomp and circumstance. She was a pageant queen. Her house was open to show off the decorations, and so there's no evidence to say that he
Why
was
she
or
didn't,
he
that's why she
wasn't.
didn't go to sleep with a full face of makeup on, because she wouldn't do that. But anyway, go on.
Right. Right. So, and I wanted to talk to you about something else about inside that house when we move on from this. But the interview was just, to me, I feel like he's a big distraction. I feel like I'd learned nothing about the case. I felt like everything he knew was already out there, and I felt like it was a sensational interview to drive ratings. I'll admit that. Like I'll be the first one to admit that, Michele. I don't think it was. I go into things, and you know this about me because we've been friends for years. When I do interviews, I'm like, well, what about this? What about that? I wasn't getting it anywhere with him. It was a fucking shit show.
It had
Like,
to be done though, because I mean, he is the only person that has ever been arrested for it, and he said this is a person who's alive, who's in front of everyone saying that he killed JonBenet, so he did have to be interviewed. I mean,
right. And in my world, I was a star or a celebrity at that moment because I was the guy on the 20th anniversary when NBC, ABC, CBS, everybody was doing this show, and I got the interview. You
Yeah.
know, but did I learn anything from it? No. Did it drive the narrative forward? No. What drove the story for me, Michele, was when I had a chance to sit down with one of the investigators. My gosh, I forgot his name. Um, and he was in the special, and he had taken video, which we've talked about. Sometimes police officers back then did with his own camera.
Yep.
And he said to me, Steph, I'll give you uh, certain segments of the video. So we went up the stairs and I saw the body, and he went room to room. And I was like, that's weird because the kids had two beds. And one of the things I said to him was, there's Burke's room. He has two beds. They weren't made. They were made. And JonBenet's room, two beds, the parents' room, blah, 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 blah. We went back and he said, "Hey, what video, what would you like?" 'Cause we were licensing it from him, from John. His name was John, great guy. He's in the story. And I said, "Oh, I want the stuff of going up the stairs. I want the stuff of JonBenet's body covered up." I said, "I'd love the stuff of Burke's room." He goes, "I can't give that to you." I'm like, "Why not?" He says, "You're the only person, Steph, that ever noticed that Burke's beds had been made and he hadn't slept in his beds that night, either of the beds." So, what does that tell us, Michele? I mean, it could tell us everything and it could tell us nothing.
Well, no, it's problematic for multiple reasons because either he never went to bed, which is a huge problem, or they made his bed, which is a huge problem because why did they make his bed before the police showed up? So either way, it's
They didn't make her bed.
what's that?
Her bed wasn't made.
Right, but why did they make the son's bed? So
Right.
either way, it's bad because if he stayed up all night, that doesn't go with the narrative of what they said. And if they made his bed before the police came, you're in the middle of a kidnapping and calling the police and you went and made the bed. So either narrative is problematic. So the reason I don't have the answer for, and I don't think you do either, but either way, it's problematic and it doesn't show well for the Ramseys because what are they trying to cover up or protect by making his bed? So, they
Right.
have to tell us.
And before we move on to sort of what happened to you after the show aired, I just want to give people my quick theory from my experiences. Patsy was up all night. She was wearing the same clothes that she was in the night before. She staged this crime. She committed this crime for whatever reason. Either Burke did it because he'd had a history of hitting his sister. Patsy covered it up. Patsy was, fed up. You're a mom. I'm a dog dad. I've gotten to that point where like, I'm gonna kill us. I'm gonna kill this dog. But that said, I don't believe that John had any prior knowledge. I don't believe that John and Patsy even slept in
Inspired.
beds.
Yeah.
And the second John wakes up, Michele, it's showtime. And John comes downstairs and he has no prior knowledge of what's happened. Patsy's written a note. This is staged. The body's gone. And the story unfolds for John Ramsey as it does for everybody else. And I'd love to talk to John and say, John, did Patsy come to bed that night? Did you guys sleep in the same bed? Because a lot of people don't. A lot of
Rich
people,
people don't sleep together. They
right,
sleep in separate
right.
beds. They don't like each other.
I think I would really like people to really kind of think like maybe John comes down the stairs, showtime for Patsy, because Patsy was a show queen pageant. And if you look at it from John's lens, he doesn't, the story's unfolding for him. Imagine what it was like for him. And I'd like to ask him if I could ask him one question. John, is it possible that you had no idea that this was unfolding before you, but it had already happened within your house and Patsy had staged this? What do
Yeah,
you
I'm
think?
sure I had to think about that at some point. But like I said, I've had so many children who have been, um, you know, killed by their parents, namely a mother, and the dads stand by the mom's side to the end, to the very end.
Well, as it unfolds, he goes down the rabbit hole. Look, I want everybody to look at the interviews on Larry King. Patsy Ramsey was under the influence of drugs. I'm
She was.
sorry.
Well, she was sedated during one of them, but you know what else you can do if you're really interested in looking at body language? Watch all the interviews, and I'm not talking about when she's sedated. It's hard to do any type of body language analysis when people are sedated, and that's probably why she was sedated. Look at the interviews she does later and turn off the volume. And if you know the questions, look at what her answers are. A lot of times she's saying no and she's doing this. And other times she's saying yes and she's doing this. A lot of times people have gives. They give themselves up without even realizing it. So a lot of times her body movements and her body language wasn't appropriate for the answers she was giving. And I said that from the beginning. I watched all the interrogation tapes. I didn't like it. Um, I don't believe she did anything with malice. I think this was a cover up for an accident. And I've said that from the beginning. I don't know what the accident was. Initially, I got to be honest, I did think Burke did something. And just recently, I've started looking over stuff again. And I am more and more leaning to the point of thinking Patsy did this completely on her own. And maybe Burke had nothing to do with it.
But perhaps he was still awake and witnessed the incident.
He could have.
But you can't rule out that Burke didn't have a prior history of hitting his sister.
I'm not ruling it out. What I'm saying now is, I said I don't know. There's certain things I don't know. And my two theories are Patsy or Burke, an accident by one of the two of them. And that's it, not John. But
So
I'm going
everybody,
to, yeah.
if you're just clicking in and you're in the middle of this, I'm Steph Watts. This is Michele Wood. She's a sergeant in the Chicago Police Department. I was one of the investigative journalists, and I produced the 3-hour special called American Murder Mysteries, JonBenet Ramsey on ID. It's now streaming on Max. Michele was one of my amazing guests, and Michele's role was, and Michele, I gave you a specific assignment. You need to watch every single minute of the interrogation tapes of John and Patsy. Plus, you need to watch the interviews with Burke Ramsey. Because we weren't allowed to air them, I needed you to take us step by step through what you saw. And the reason we asked you to do this is because you're an expert. You've done this for years. This is what you do. So, Michele, after the show airs, and I thought we did an amazing job, and I thought you did a really great job. Really, you were really, it was a big assignment for you. The bar was high because every network was doing this, and most people involved in my show were directly involved in the case, and you nailed it. You did a wonderful job. Tell me what happens after the show airs. Who reaches out to you?
So, yeah, so I was talking to a lot of people on Twitter at the time, X or whatever it is now. And, a couple people were like, yeah, I was there during the time. And then one specific person reached out to me. It was a former firefighter from Boulder, Colorado, Dale. And he's like, yeah, I was actually one of the first responders. I was a firefighter paramedic who arrived on the scene. I'm like, no way. No one's ever talked to you. And he's like, well, actually, can I send you a message? He sent me a message. We started talking, and I found out so much information from him. He's actually the first responder that responded to a 911 call of a person calling for help. He arrived on the scene, and
Who was the, let me stop you. Who was the individual that called?
someone called from the Ramsey residence, and it turns out he believed he was there. When he arrived on scene, he knew that there was a child who was injured or hurt, or someone was hurt inside the house. But I think he was actually called because Patsy Ramsey was having a heart attack. But the timeline, from what we all know, does not jive with the information that Dale gave us. And Dale did provide me his run sheets. I have the original run sheets from the night of the murder or the day of the murder, because I believe it was sometime in the afternoon. He sent it to me. I have all the paramedics' names. I have all the firefighters' names. I was able to validate all of this. And Steph and I did a really
Now,
in-depth
let me
interview.
stop you right there, just so people understand. Dale's a firefighter, and there was two other firefighters in the truck at that time. They get a
Two
call
or
from
three,
the
yeah.
Ramsey home. It was Patsy Ramsey. They arrive at the home prior to JonBenet's body being found, correct?
Correct.
And what do they see? What do they witness? What do they testify to?
So they arrive at the scene and they get what's called a wave off. which means we don't need you anymore. So they're like, okay, and they're in this big fire truck. So they do the loop around, and then they get called back to the scene. And then they arrive back at the scene, and it's only minutes later. And when they get to the door of the residence, they're again told they're no longer needed. But when they look inside the residence, they could see what they now know is JonBenet on the floor. But none of these guys go in and do life-saving efforts. They don't go in and pronounce her. And I said to him, I'm like, isn't that kind of odd that in Chicago, and maybe this is not done in other places, but the firefighters will try to do life-saving measures, whether the person is dead or not, especially when it's a little kid. If it's a little kid, the kid could be deceased for a while, and they will still try to make the attempt, at least
Right.
for.
Because you never know, right?
Never know. We never know. And then if they do pronounce someone, they do it via telemetry, which means that they call the hospital in and they make a phone call and they're able to do the pronouncement over phone. They didn't do it that way. And another very odd thing is when Dale arrived on scene, the coroner was already parked in front of the house. And he thought it was weird because there was a dusting of snow on top of the coroner's car, and it hadn't snowed for a couple hours. So it led him to believe that the coroner's car was there for a couple hours. And the significance of all of this is that the timeline is off, and it leads him to believe that they found JonBenet a lot earlier than they said they did.
Right.
So,
Let me stop you there, Michele. I want people to understand that, we're in Boulder, Colorado. There's a certain level of, and I think people can really understand what they see what's going on now with Elon Musk and Trump and all these guys. There's an upper echelon, there's a high society affiliation. Okay. So Dale arrives at the scene, and it's not just Dale, there's two other firefighters, and we've got a big bombshell to drop to end this story. They get there and they see the coroner's car's there, and the coroner's car is parked in front, and it's covered in snow, and it hadn't snowed for hours. Okay. If everybody's doubting our story, if they're doubting Dale, now let's finish this story. Michele, what happens? Dale is telling this story to people a few days later, and Dale ends up by being questioned by who?
well, he gets questioned by a couple people. So, which part are you talking about when he gets
Well,
brought?
Linda Arndt. I
Yeah.
mean, like I just want people to understand, like, this isn't some frivolous theory we have. Dale gave a sworn testimony to Linda Arndt. Tell me who Linda Arndt is, and tell me how this transpired, and why, Michele, why have we never heard about this before? I mean, it's
I don't
insane.
know. And you know what? Like, we asked him if the other firefighters were also interviewed, and he says he believes they were, but it was something they were told not to talk about, which is standard. But it's just super interesting the way that everything happened.
But
He
Michele,
was.
let me just stop you there. So I want people to understand, Linda Arndt told Dale, don't ever tell anybody about this. Okay. And he didn't. So when we asked him, did the other two firefighters speak about this? He said, well, I don't know because I was told not to.
Right.
So we can only assume that they were told not to, and they didn't talk to each other.
But it's
Correct?
weird that and I told him, I'm like, you guys didn't like have like Firehouse talk and talk about it. And I believe that they just didn't talk about it. But he was interviewed by other people too. It seems like there was a lot of investigations going, a lot of secretive stuff. People weren't talking to each other. I'll tell you right now with fire and police, when something's happening at a location in the city, the firefighters all know what's going on. There's not this level of secrecy that was occurring during the JonBenet situation. Like they didn't know that there was a little, girl inside the house that was the daughter of a prominent family that was brutally murdered. They didn't know this. There's no reason to hide all this stuff. The Ramseys were afforded so much secrecy and stuff that other people wouldn't have been allowed, when they were
Michele,
allowed to.
tell me, sorry, I don't want to cut you up, but I know we got to move this along. Tell me why, to you, the interview with Dale was suspect. What happened during the interview with Linda Arndt? And give us a big picture of why you think it's significant and what do you think it means? When Linda Arndt, how did she find out about Dale?
Well, she didn't find out about it right away. She found out about it afterwards. And she's like, "Oh, did you arrive on the scene?" Which is weird because she could have just, she's not an experienced investigator. So any experienced investigator would have just pulled the run sheets for the night and would have known that emergency medical services arrived on the scene because they got a 911 call. But she found out about him afterwards. She ended up interviewing him. She interviewed him. And what she was doing during the interview, and I believe this 100%, is she was memorializing his interview, meaning recording it, and she was interviewing him. She was stopping the recording in the middle of the interview. So either record it or don't, but don't record part of it and not the other part. So I thought that was suspect. I thought that was weird. Um, he might
Really
have been
weird
part of the grand jury investigation too. Um, but those are things that he can't obviously talk about at length. But go on, Steph, because I know we got to wrap this up.
No, but what I'd like to say is and I think all the web sleuths out there and everybody that looks into this, because I admire them. They're diehards.
Yeah.
Love it. So you and I would like to ask everybody, all the web sleuths, if you guys are looking into every stone, take a look at Dale. Michele and I have tried to get this in. We've FOIA'd this interview. We've never gotten it, but please know that what we're saying, Dale, this firefighter, reached out to Michele after he saw her on our special. And the reason he reached out to Michele, because he felt comfortable, because he checked her out, and Michele is a seasoned detective, now a sergeant with the Chicago Police Department. And in Dale's mind, right, Michele, he's like, she's legit. I trust her. I'm comfortable. Michele, you and I vetted him for 4 years. It was 4 years before we ever came public with Dale. Now, we produced a podcast, Case by Case, JonBenet. We're not here to push that, but we would love for people to listen
If
to
you
it.
want to watch it, listen to it. No.
Yeah, give us, listen to it. We have an exclusive, detailed interview with Michele and Dale, and Michele goes through her notes, her run sheet, because Michelle's meticulous at this stuff. And Dale, the thing I loved about Dale, Michele, was like he reached out to you because he's like, Michele, I just want to know what happened, right? Like, what did you feel like his big thing was? Like, he wasn't coming to us like, hey guys, I want to be famous, I want to be involved. He was actually super reluctant,
No,
right?
he wants to know what happened. And he, like a lot of people, every single day, people call me and email me. They're like, okay, Michele, I have one question. Who killed JonBenet? And sometimes it's joking and sometimes it's serious. But that's what Dale said. He's like, I really want to know what happened. I want to know why she recorded part of the interview and not the rest of it. And I think at the end of the day, he thinks that something fishy was going on. He doesn't know exactly what was going on and the reason why they did the things that they did. He thought it was fishy, and he thought that he should probably reach out to someone and give his version of the story. So, I mean, we can wrap this up right now with that. And if people want to just check out his interview and just listen, you can listen in Dale's voice and just hear. He remembers everything pretty well.
Hmm?
He's a great guy too.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah, you
seasoned.
did an amazing job, Michele. Like, really, you did. And just to reiterate, his name is Dale. We actually, protected his identity, his last name. And I just want everybody to understand he was a firefighter. Okay. He arrived on the scene. Okay. JonBenet Ramsey's body had not been found. It literally, by the time they get called back, he shows up at the front door. She's in the living room. It's all unfolding. And he's already noticed prior to arriving that the coroner's car is there because he knows the coroner's car. Dale knows who the coroner's car is. It's
Well, it
been
says orange, so yeah.
right, Michele. But here's the thing, and I want people to really listen to this. Michele, I come to your house and I'll be like, oh, Michele hasn't been out to this morning because her car's covered in snow. He specifically remembered the car was covered in snow. Okay. It had been there for an extended period of time. The question we have is why was the coroner's car there prior to JonBenet Ramsey's body being found? And then to really, make this factual, Linda Arndt finds out about this Dale days later, when he's talking at the fire department, right? He's just telling people what happened. Somebody says, gets this back to Linda R, and she's like, oh my God, what? And she has conversations with them. Then during those interviews, she stops the recording for certain parts of it and turns it back on. Guys, with all the theories floating around about there, we have factual evidence of somebody that has new information, and it changes the trajectory of the story as far as I'm concerned, right, Michele? What does it mean? Michele, tell me what you, before we go, what could that mean? What could this information that Dale has mean?
I don't know. I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's been so many theories floating out there, and I think the answers have always been right in front of our face. And I think we just need to look at the facts of the case. And there's no intruder out there that we're looking for. We need to look for the answers, and I think they're right in front of our face. And that's it.
Well, let's keep this conversation going. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was fun, right? I mean, not fun. I don't mean to make light of it, but this what, I've been meaning to kind of have like a heart to heart with you about it because we never really talked about it outside of like
Oh, so many people ask me, yeah, on social media, people are always like, what does the Dale interview mean? And I think that I said at some point I'm going to explain exactly what the interview meant and the significance of everything. So any questions or anything else, maybe, we'll write them down and we'll go through it again next time.
Yeah. And then if we get traction on this, if people want to talk about this, right, Michele, we're both willing to do a live, you know, like, Facebook Live or YouTube Live on this. But I think in the world of theories and all the stuff with JonBenet Ramsey, I just ask people to take a look at this, listen to the interview on case by case, you know, Solving JonBenet is the name of our podcast, case by case, Solving JonBenet, because we really feel like we've kind of solved it. And we are true believers that there was no intruder. Thanks, Michele. I really think it's great work. I really think, and I want people to understand, you're an active sergeant with Chicago Police Department. You did this as an assignment for us. You've got a million things going on. You're a young mom, and a million people reach out to you with crazy stuff. Dale stuck to you. You came to me with it, and you and I and Jarrett Ferrantino, our partner in crime on the podcast, agree that this got Dale has some credibility. Thanks. Michele and I, she's the police, I'm the press. We're two peas in a pod. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good night. Bye.